So today I propose to discuss the term friendship in relation to the referential field, the commons. My reason for proposing the term is an interest in understanding how the proposition of the commons might shift from something that is abstracted, what the preamble on the Glossary website rightly describes as a discursive illusion, to something we could understand on a more personal, human, even subjective level. What, I wrote in my abstract, does it mean to be in common? What types of relationships or modes of being together would that involve? These were questions that I hope to answer by revisiting a project I worked on with the artist Celine Condorelli at the Van Aber in 2014, and her investigation into the discourse on friendship, much of which was brought together in a small publication we produced titled The Company She Keeps. Drawing from the relatively brief but rich discourse on friendship, from classical philosophers like Aristotle to contemporary theorists such as Agamben, Condorelli explores through a series of conversations different genealogies, examples, and propositions for friendship. I recently revisited this book and some of the references it maps. I was struck by how we might understand the role of friendship in relation to a project of the commons, how we might consider friendship as a form of solidarity, how friendships between the excluded have provided the grounds and means with which to resist systems of power and elites, and how the concept of the multitude, so closely aligned with that of the commons, might be thought of in terms of an infinite friendship. However, my task of writing and considering friendship within the context of the discursive illusion of the commons has subsequently become tangled, complicated, and on a very practical level, harder for me to articulate after Britain's referendum vote to leave the EU last week. It is a vote that has left me included, in shock at what the country voted for and its ramifications and implications, both in Britain and for the European project. How does one, looking at a country voluntarily isolating itself and propagating an increasingly divisive politics, talk about the notion of friendship, of being in common? Furthermore, over the past few days, I've been wondering where the unraveling events of last week's referendum leave my relationship to the discursive illusion of the commons. This is not to suggest that the European project should be equated with the notion of the commons, but there seem significant impulses that straddle both, and what Britain's vote have rejected. That of a shared purpose, a shared set of values, rights and laws, of a more broader understanding of equality, that Britain has placed itself outside or above. The commons in relation to previous referential fields, subjectivization, historicization, geopolitics, and constituencies, is propositional in the ways that the other terms, I think, are not. It demarcates a potential political and ideological space. It is, as the Glossary site notes, seen as a way out of the cul-de-sac of neoliberal hegemony. In the wake of last week's referendum and its apparent repercussions, that potential space feels more illusory, more closed than before. It also feels harder, but that much more necessary to contemplate its possibility. And within that, perhaps the attempt to bring it from a discursive illusion to something that can be practiced and thought about in terms of relationships and modes of being is ever more urgent. I want to start by considering the history of the discourse on friendship and the types of precedents it would seem important to work against in any project of the commons. In The Company She Keeps, Condorelli's conversation with the philosopher Johann Hartl begins by discussing friendship as something that takes place between men, and is something that is subsequently written about by men. Derrida addresses this issue in the opening pages of Politics of Friendship, and as Condorelli writes, the issue remains. No female philosophers have written about friendship. Friendship remains entirely patriarchal and fratriarchal. They are, Condorelli writes, closely linked to the notions of freedom and democracy stemming from the idea of a nation of brothers, and with the terrifying consequences that we can only live together because we are the same, share the same land, the same birth, the same blood, the same language. Furthermore, what emerges in classical philosophy, according to Condorelli and Hartl, is an exclusive and exclusionary notion of friendship. She quotes Hauke Birkenhorst, who, paraphrasing Aristotelian tradition, writes, "Citizens, in a double sense, must be free. They must find each other of their own free will, and they must be just as free from the cares of daily survival, thus from labor, as they are from the will and commands of a master. Therefore, they can neither be slaves nor women." What we see emerging in the classical discourse on friendship is that which takes place between the propertied male elites. It is a notion of friendship that is tied to a particular sense of belonging, to a land, a class, a hierarchy. In many senses, such a classical understanding of friendship would seem to work against the notion of the common, or of being in common, as, by its very nature, it excludes. It is in this domain of exclusion that the emptiness of Britain's decision to leave finds itself, a decision to exclude itself from a shared political, cultural, and ideological project, a decision or desire to exclude peoples who might not share the same land, the same birth, the same blood, the same language, that became such a defining feature of the more repellent populist rhetoric. Yet there is also the very real sense of exclusion that the disenfranchised feel from patriarchal and fratriarchal power, that the friendships between male propertied elites that Aristotle refers to is something that is echoed in many different systems and structures of power operative today. This was a vote given under the shadow of exclusion in its many different guises. It is here worth picking up on Agamben's understanding of friendship, written in his short essay, The Friend, which Condorelli and Hartle explore, and which might serve as a link or trajectory towards the notion of the commons. Interestingly, Agamben returns to Aristotle and his notion of consent. Quoting Aristotle, Agamben writes, "One must also therefore consent that his friend exists, and this happens by sharing acts and thoughts in common. This idea of friendship takes it away from the notion of sharing property, language, blood, to an idea of sharing thoughts and acts, what Condorelli describes as a process of coexistence through sharing and doing." In a series of conversations, Condorelli and socialist Avery Gordon attempt to chart a history of friendships between the excluded, between women and slaves. If the history of friendship has been treated by philosophers as something that not only takes place between male elites, but something that is abstracted, what is described in the book as merely a cipher for the political, which makes it fundamentally exclusionary, what they are interested in charting are the modalities of friendship that are more pragmatic, in terms of how the excluded implemented different forms of resistance. Drawing on the examples of the early suffragettes movement at the beginning of the 20th century in Britain, and later in the peace camps in Greenham Common in 1980s England, where women occupied the common in protest against the decision to house cruise missiles there, friendship emerges as a modality for social change, a means to express and harness solidarity against a common cause. Equally significant is Avery Gordon's research into the history of friendship between slaves. Drawing on John Hope Franklin and Lauren Schwenger's book, Runaway Slaves, Rebels on the Plantation, friendship emerges as a key tool between runaways. As slaves were prohibited from basic freedoms, prohibited from free association, from basic activities such as reading and writing, runaways' friendships provided a whole network and access to legal help, hideouts, food and drink. As Gordon writes, friendship, working well together, helping out, solidarity, keeping secrets, these were crucial aspects in African American slave culture because the absence of public recognition and support, or worse, its criminalization, meant that you had to create your systems of support within your own cultural milieu. What emerges in all of these different models of friendship is a structure of solidarity and horizontal relationship. What is crucial to Condorelli and Avery's understanding of friendship, and ones that may be useful in relation to the notion of the commons, is their insistence on not only befriending people, but also ideas, systems, values, what she calls elective affinities. In relation to cultural practice, this can be considered in terms of the book one reads, the affinities one holds with certain ways of thinking, the associations that one draws into one's work, what we surround ourselves with. Hannah Arendt, Condorelli tells us, defines cultural practice as the company one chooses to keep in the present as well as in the past. This subsequently emerges as a productive definition of what friendship could be. Befriending issues, Condorelli argues, is also the point at which, while still being an elective affinity and working on a personal level, it also has consequences on a larger scale. And as I contemplate the manner in which ideas and issues were put forward regarding the case for Europe, it seems that the possibility to affiliate oneself with the idea of a shared political project was entirely absent. The political imaginary, the proposition of what company people might want to keep in history as well as today, was not there. there was never a moment when elective affinities came into view. If this referendum and its accompanying politics fostered a politics of exclusion, the task is to reflect on a model of friendship that is able to find common cause, such as the friendships that emerge from political movements such as the suffragettes, the activists of Greenham Common, or the slaves. In this regard, it is important to reflect on the central question in this publication: what can friends do? In the book, we're introduced to Spinoza's understanding and definition of friendship. For him, Johann Hartl writes, friendship is an affectionate relationship in and through which humans naturally increase their potentia agendi, their vital capacities. Linked very closely to Spinoza's understanding of friendship is the notion of a common understanding and striving to achieve a common intellect. Unlike classical philosophy, Spinoza's notion of friendship goes beyond abstractions. He writes in Ethics, people bind themselves by those bonds most apt to make one people of them, and absolutely to do those things which serve to strengthen friendships. It also means that we are taken into the concrete social existence of human beings. Far from being a mere social accord, friendships emerge as something that is also garnered through material labor. In this regard, we can understand Spinoza's view on friendship as resting in the communal development of the intellect, but one that collapses the distinction between mind and body, something that Condorelli seems as chiming with the construction of the common. She writes, the formation of the common is in this way as much an agreement in terms of bodies as it is in terms of intellects, and the construction of people is the construction of shared effects. Following Spinoza for Hart and Negri, as Condorelli and Hartl go on to explore, friendship is in fact rooted in effective labor, in what they describe as the communal production of the common. Here we can think of friendship as something necessary to the construction of the political. Such an idea leads Hartl to ask, could we conceive of the multitude in terms of an infinite friendship? To see friendship as a vital component that links the common, the commune, and the communal. There remains unresolvable for now a disheartening disconnect between my own reflections on friendship, its relationship to the commons, and the very real disintegration of a common and political social project. How do these events of last week implicate a shared political and cultural project such as Internationale? If the referendum and its results have revealed one thing to me, is that our task in arguing for a certain vision of culture and its relationships to politics just became more urgent. But by the same token, it's also revealed the chasm between the discursive illusion and the reality we now face. To bridge that chasm, our language needs to be more precise, our insistence on arguing for a more inclusive type of politics that much clearer. In this sense, and on an institutional level, the model of friendship as the development of a common understanding between people seems particularly cogent. Friendships exist without contracts, and by inference without obligations. In this sense, they are unspoken. As Condorelli writes, we, however, can and do speak to our friends, which is already to act in friendship, as a practice, a process. What would that process engender in an institutional context, either across museums such as through a project like Internationale, or amongst its various constituents? How might the politics of friendships, a politics that is premised on notions of solidarity, the common, of being in common, rather than the exclusionary, serve to move past our various discursive illusions? Done.